Today we're talking about a quirky little camera from Japan while enjoying some whiskey from Ireland with an English dog breed. Nick Carver here for another episode of Behind the Glass with a Glass. And today I want to tell you about one of my most fun cameras to use, which is the Fujifilm GA645Zi. But before we get into the camera, let me tell you about what I'm drinking. I have myself here a Jameson Black Barrel Irish Whiskey. And not too much to say about it, and also I want to get into the camera pretty quick here. But I will say this. This is a delicious whiskey that doesn't break the bank. I think it's a great whiskey to have on your bar cart for, when you get home at the end of a long day, you want something delicious, but you're not going to break open the special stuff. That's for special occasions. This, to me, I can always go to it as a good, solid, tasty whiskey that isn't going to break the bank. It'll run you about 32 bucks to get this bottle. To me, it tastes like vanilla. Nowhere online do I read Jameson Black Barrel Whiskey has complex flavors of vanilla. So maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'm tasting. But whatever the case, it's delicious. I do recommend it. But let's talk about the camera. Yeah, that is good. So, I really enjoy using this camera. It's one of my funnest cameras to use, largely because I kind of let the camera do all the work for me. I almost always shoot in P mode on this camera, which I know it might sound funny to some people. Don't you shoot everything in manual? Aren't you professional shooting manual? No, there's plenty of situations where it ain't worth my time to shoot in manual. And this camera has such a great meter built into it that it does phenomenal exposures on P. And I tend to shoot things where the aperture and the shutter aren't going to matter all that much anyway, so I'm going to let the camera take care of it for me. But I'll tell you why I bought this camera. I went on a trip to Maui, a family trip, and I had brought my RZ67 with me. And that's a beast of a camera, and I realized pretty quick that was the wrong camera to have on that trip. It's so big and heavy, it's just such a huge production to go out and take pictures. And it's not something you can like throw in your backpack when you go on a hike. It's a slower camera. It's for careful, thought out photography. And I realized right then and there, you know what? I want a camera where I can basically point and shoot. I want something I can take quick pictures, but I want it to be on film, and I want it to be medium format, because that's the format I like, and I obviously love shooting film. So I'm sure you know how it is. As soon as I got that bee in my bonnet of I need a compact, handheld medium format, I'm on eBay, baby. Got my phone up, I'm looking, comparing the Contact 645 to the Mamiya 6 to the Mamiya 7. What are the specs on these? What are they running with? Meanwhile, everyone's having a gay old time in the pool. So I'm caught up in my phone. What are we doing here? I need this camera. I need it now. So I did a lot of research. I looked at the Mamiya 6, Mamiya 7, the Contact 645s. I was looking for a rangefinder camera, something compact. And I ultimately settled on this Fuji GA645Zi because it had a good balance between being compact, shooting 645, while having a lot of the modern accoutrement. It's got modern features. So I can kind of shoot quick and easy, and I don't really have to get too involved with the camera when I'm using it. And I do like that about it. Now, this camera originally came out in 1998. It was in a silver version only. It's really more of a champagne. It's kind of like a warm goldish silver. And then a year later, in 1999, it came out with this black version. It's really more of a graphite, but I really wanted this one. I almost pulled the trigger on like a silverish one, but what can I say? I'm comfortable with my masculinity, but evidently not enough to carry around a champagne-colored camera. I needed this one. This one's murdered out, bro. It looks rad. It looks rad like me. So, I wanted the darker version. I think it's it's a handsome camera, is the best way I can describe it. So I went on eBay. I was lucky to stumble upon this screaming deal. I got this for 529 bucks 2 years ago. And it came to me, it looked brand new. It looked like never even been opened. So it was in great shape. Low shutter count too. They've gone up in price a little bit. You can still get them on eBay all day. The silver ones are much more common, but they have gone up in price. They're running about $650 to $850 nowadays. But let's talk about the camera itself. So it shoots 645, and it's kind of a weird camera because it shoots vertical when the camera's horizontal. If you want to do a horizontal picture, you turn the camera vertical. That took some getting used to, and I don't know why I love that. It's just kind of interesting to me. There's not many cameras you look through, and you're horizontal, but you're seeing vertical. Now, it's a fun little camera largely because it's kind of at the tail end of when they were making film cameras. You know, 1999, digital was starting to creep in. I think a lot of camera manufacturers were starting to kind of coast to a stop on making film cameras, and digital was right around the corner, so there weren't going to be too many of these. So it's interesting that it has a lot of modern features, and it looks like a very modern camera, but it shoots film, which I think is interesting. It's got a power zoom, so like your grandma's old point and shoot camera. It's got a power zoom controlled by a little lever on the back here. And the zoom lens is kind of hysterical because it's got 4 settings. So you go zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and it's only got 4 positions. It's 55 millimeters, 65 millimeters, 75 millimeters, and 90 millimeters. So it's like a 2x zoom. It's like nothing. It barely zooms in. It's almost not even worth zooming in. But evidently it's enough to require a power zoom. But what I really love about this lens is that it's crazy sharp. This thing is like razor sharp. It's not a very fast lens. The widest aperture when you're at the wide end is 4.5. The widest aperture when you're at telephoto is 6.9. So it barely lets in light. It's not a great camera for low light photography. That might be my only complaint about it. But that's the trade-off for having this sweet power zoom. It's such a 90s feature. It's a power zoom. You don't have to turn your hand. You can just nudge this little lever and it'll zoom in for you. Now it's also autofocus. It has a single focus point in the center of the viewfinder. It is really good autofocus. It handles low light really well. I don't believe it uses just standard contrast autofocus because it's too good for that. So I don't know exactly what it's using, but it is very accurate. It does have manual focus, but it's a royal pain in the ass to use. There's no rotate ring to adjust focus. Basically, you have to switch it to manual focus and then use the control dial that would normally adjust the aperture to focus on a preset distance. So you can't do it visually. You have to do it based on the distance to your subject. So you got to kind of know that or be able to estimate it at least. It's a very simple light meter. It's just center weighted average. But as I mentioned, it is super accurate. It does a great job of figuring out exposure. I had a Mamiya 6 for a short time, and that meter sucked. It just did not get correct exposure ever. But this one, I really barely have to tweak it at all. I just let it do its thing, and it gives me great exposure most of the time. If you are going to shoot in manual, there's not a linear scale for the meter. It just has an up arrow if you're overexposed, down arrow if you're underexposed. Both arrows light up if you're correctly exposed per Fujifilm's definition of correct exposure. Doesn't mean it's the correct exposure, it just means it's what the camera thinks is correct exposure. But like I said, I basically never use this thing in manual. I put it in P mode, or if I feel like I really need to control the aperture, I'll put it in A mode. But that's about it. Now, speaking of the modes on the top here, it's got P mode program. The camera's going to do the shutter and aperture for you. It's got A mode for aperture priority, and the camera's going to take care of the shutter, of course. But it won't let the shutter go below 1/45th of a second. So that's to avoid camera shake, of course. Then it has this interesting mode, which is AS, Aperture Priority Mode, Slow Synchronization. That allows the shutter speed to go as low as 2 seconds, I believe. So it's like regular Aperture Priority Mode. It allows it to use any shutter speed it deems fit. And then there's Manual Mode, where you're doing everything. Notice there's no Shutter Priority Mode on this. One of my many reasons that I think camera makers know that Shutter Priority Mode is useless. Shutter Priority Mode is useless, by the way. It's a terrible mode. Don't ever use it. It's a horrible mode. They shouldn't put it on cameras. They didn't put it on this camera. They must have had a reason for that. But anyway, so other kind of funny modern features about it. It's got this LCD screen on the back that'll show you your ISO, the shutter count. your battery meter, your shutter, your aperture. So it's kind of like a modern camera in that you're seeing all that stuff on a backlit LCD screen. It's got this nice green backlight for shooting in the dark. It can also imprint data onto the border of the film. So it can input the date, the shooting mode you use, shutter, aperture, the exposure compensation, whether the flash fired or not. It's really cool because you can look back at your settings and see, you know, when things were working well and when weren't. So it's almost like old-fashioned metadata. You can look up your shutter, aperture, and ISO right on the negative, which I think is kind of cool. It's got a self-timer. It's got a built-in flash. It's kind of a great camera for, you know, party pics and things like that. Pop the flash up and get that real harsh party flash look. Those are always fun. It does have a beep indicator like modern cameras, but it's funny because it's not for focus. In other words, you press halfway down, it doesn't beep when it focuses. It beeps when you take a picture, which is kind of odd, but this camera's so quiet when it actually clicks the shutter that they decided, oh, you might need a beep to let you know that you took a picture. I don't know, I guess the deafening wind of film to the next frame wasn't enough to let you know you took a picture. They felt you needed a beep on it. Now you can, of course, turn that beep off. I generally do. That beep also, if it's turned on, it'll beep, I think, 6 times when you get to the final frame of your roll. So it's a kind of a useful feature, but it's mostly annoying, so I turn it off. Old style cable release connection, which is kind of nice. You don't have to get any sort of electronic cable release if you're planning on doing long exposures. You can change the distance unit on the focus, meters for feet, whatever. Inside the viewfinder, you see the distance that it's focused on, so you can kind of verify that it focused on the proper thing. And then it's got your shutter and your aperture and your meter if it's in there. Kind of a cool feature is it has a lens cap warning. So if the lens cap is on, it will actually detect that and it will blink the frame lines at you, letting you know that the lens cap is on. Now, I would be lying if I told you I had never accidentally taken a picture on a rangefinder camera with the lens cap on. Because after all, you're looking through the viewfinder, you don't see that the lens cap is on, and sometimes I'm a dope and I don't pay attention to it, and then I take a picture that comes out black. I had that issue on the Mamiya 6 sometimes. But this will let me know if I left the camera on, or left the cap on. One really quirky feature about many Fuji cameras is they have an odometer. So they actually keep track of how many times the shutter's been clicked. It's useful for maintenance and seeing how old the camera is and things like that. Many of the Fuji cameras actually have like an old style odometer on the bottom where it rotates, so kind of like on an old car. But this one's interesting. You basically switch the camera from off to ISO while holding the exposure compensation button. And then on the back screen, it'll show you in hundreds how many frames it's taken. But if you are planning on buying a Fuji camera, be sure to ask the seller, you know, what's the frame count on it? Because on most of them, if not all of them, you can find that out. But I have to say, this camera, I've taken some of my favorite pictures on this camera. And I don't know if that's because I actually like the pictures or if it's because I enjoyed using the camera so much when I did it that the pictures end up meaning a little more to me. But because it's kind of a point and shoot style camera for me, I feel like I can concentrate more on compositions and being in the moment, taking pictures. You know, it's almost like street photography. You don't really, you're kind of more trying to capture that perfect moment rather than fumbling with settings and all that kind of stuff. Which, don't get me wrong, there's a time and place for that. I love my large format cameras. But it's really fun to walk around somewhere with this camera around my neck, let the camera take care of the work for me, concentrate on finding those moments, finding that light, finding those interesting scenes, and let the camera just handle it for me in P mode. I, of course, use exposure compensation when needed. That's very useful. If I'm shooting a bright subject, I put it up to plus. If I'm shooting a dark subject, put it down to minus. But yeah, it's a fun camera. I really enjoy it. All the power winding of the film, I'm not a huge fan of. I kind of wish it was a lever to move to the next frame just because it's so damn loud. So I really can't do in any sort of incognito photography or trying to sneak up on scenes or whatever. Because I know as soon as I click the shutter to take the frame, it's going to give this loud ring to the next frame, and then that's going to kind of give away my position. But for situations where the noise isn't that big a deal, it's not a huge drawback. So I'm actually going to Paris and London for the first time in my life this December, and I'm really struggling figuring out what camera to bring. This one is starting to lead the pack. I think it's going to be great for travel photography. Yes, the lens doesn't zoom very much, but I think that might be a minor trade-off for having this sweet little compact 645 camera to lug around with me. So there it is, Fujifilm GA645Zi. Fun camera. Modern amenities, but old style photography. So, you know, as always, thanks for watching. Go out and get yourself some Jameson Black Barrel. I think you'll enjoy it. But until next time, cheers.